Welcome to Engaging Truth. This is one of your hosts, Dave Schultz. But my favorite co-host is John Cain. He's with me tonight, and we have a special guest who we will introduce in just a minute. We're going to talk about the millennial mystery. We're living in a world where we hear an awful lot about these people called millennials, and we're going to find out about it tonight from someone who I seem to believe really is quite outspoken on the issue, and I'm willing to ask the hard questions. She'll give the hard answers. The church today seems really unauthentic to young people. Folks in the boomer generation seem to prefer to keep the church in its current form rather than change it to reach even out to their own children, yet they criticize their adult children for not attending. When young people look at most churches, they see time and treasure given to basically supporting the local congregation instead of investing in the community outreach. With these and many more conflicting outlooks, how do we reach the millennials of our generation today? And so to the microphone, we welcome this evening one of our favorite people, Jordan Evan.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor. Good to be here.
We're going to ask you some fun questions, and you can answer them just the way you want to.
Sounds good.
You don't have to be bashful about saying really what you think. Tell me, first of all, who's the greatest influence in your life?
Oh, man. That's not something we talked
Besides
about
Jesus,
at all.
of course.
Besides Jesus. Probably my folks. I mean, I think they set me out on a pretty good course, and if you stay on that, it's hard to claim it's anyone else, I suppose.
So what you claim today is what they planted as seeds in your life.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much true.
Somewhere along the line, you developed your own wings.
Yeah, I think so.
What do those wings look like in terms of giftedness?
Oh, well, I'm a church musician, so I work at St. John and help out also with our Mission Start Cypress Chapel, doing a variety of different instruments, and music's just really, around about the time I got into high school, really started galvanizing me. I learned quickly. I was scrapping to maybe sit on the bench for the freshman basketball team, and the choir director was begging me to be in the auditioned choir, and about that time I was like, okay, this is really what I should be doing. What crazy to not do that. So,
Jordan, can you identify for our listeners kind of what this generation is of the millennials?
Oh gosh, yeah, I think you'll get a lot of different textbook definitions from different people, but you could say people that are 18 to 32, 34. Interesting now that I think a lot of social scientists are saying even people in high school are going to be a completely new generation. So we might be through with this mystery here sometime soon. But
well, as people get older, they get a little bit more defined, I'm sure, in their likes and their tastes. Speaking of tastes, what do you think is the issue? Some millennials seem to find music and church architecture as a barrier. Others say, if I'm going to go to church, I want it to look and sound like church.
Yeah, I think.
So what's your experience?
I think everyone's different. So the blurb there that you read, Pastor Schultz, about inauthenticity isn't necessarily defined by a genre, right? I think you're right. A lot of young people want music in their vernacular, but what people are missing with feeling like authentic relationships or the church being outward looking like Jesus was really has very little to do with music choice sometimes. So on some levels, you look around and you see young people being reached with new music, but I think it's maybe a little bit haphazard to assume that a contemporary service is a panacea for the issues of my generation.
Each generation seems to disintegrate to some degree in its relationship to church. Mm-hmm. I've heard a number, and of course I could be way off, but I've heard the number that less than 10% of you really think in terms of church having value. What is the real number on that?
Well, I guess I don't have the scientific poll, but I've heard similar things. I know the Barna Group has done studies that as from my best memory, have borne that out. And just from my experience, if I think back, it's kind of sad to say I go to my home church and look at the various confirmation photos from the years, around mine and my siblings' time, and it might just be me and my siblings that are, in mine, I think 6 people, and there's maybe one other besides me that is regular in church, so we're beating the odds at that, I guess, 10%. So
So there's a value in what church does. The value seems to me, from talking to other millennials, is the value is Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a focal point. It isn't other things. Is that true?
I think so. And that gets back to how you opened. People see kind of the struggle with what Jesus did with his life and how he lived it and where he spent most of his time. He didn't spend most of his time necessarily exclusively on believers. He spent a lot of time pursuing unbelievers. Now, obviously, he shepherded and ministered to his believers, but he shepherded them to shepherd each other and also focused on even the needs of people, not to the exclusion of preaching the gospel, but it was definitely part of it. And I think a lot of young people, I would imagine if you asked young people what they thought about Jesus, you'd get a much higher percentage, right, of approval rating, if you would, or even buy-in to religion or faith than you would church, which is not a distinction maybe that previous generations would make, distinction between faith and church. But I think that's a big distinction for younger people.
Your relationship to Christ is important. I mean,
yeah,
because
absolutely.
I've known you for a while and I've heard you talk about it, and what you do exemplifies that. Because it is important to you, how would you speak to one of your friends who really sees the church as irrelevant? I mean, what kind of a convincing argument would you use in that conversation with him?
Honestly, it's a tough sale. I would I can agree with some of their criticisms or issues. I think two levels. If you value something and you see a need for change or value there, you can either walk away from it or you can try to help it grow through issues. So that's my hopes for the church. To someone outside of it, I think I would focus on my perception on what's missing in our society and its relationships and connectivity, obviously coming from Christ, but that community and then what the community does for each other and then can go out from and do. I think there's still a lot there in the church that can reach that, and it's just a matter of plugging people into it. It's easier said than done.
Jordan, when you talk to somebody and try to demonstrate the relevancy of the church and of the gospel of Jesus to someone's life, what do you think is the better approach? Is it talking about person's needs, a personal relationship with Jesus and spirituality, or is social aspects
I guess
a better angle?
Depends on the person, really. I think, again, obviously we want to be authentic in either case, that the message of Christ is Christ crucified for the forgiveness of sins, and that's an eternal and not just social current message. But he did do a lot of things for society, for people. And so I think you start where someone's at. So if someone's really, really, first of all, you're not convincing anyone, it's the Spirit, right? But if someone's really skeptical about who Christ is, but their attention is grabbed by social actions, then that's a great starting point. If they're much more curious about spirituality, then maybe it's a better starting point to explain kind of what your understanding of God is and how God relates to you through Christ. And I think maybe more than previous generations, the millennials are willing to have that discussion. I don't know that in droves they are taking it up for Christ yet, but it's encouraging to me that they're at least open to spirituality, maybe more than the militant atheists and secularism that emerged in the generation before.
Our nation is obviously rather divided politically,
sure enough,
economically, racially, and generationally.
Yeah.
And there's probably one or two that I'm forgetting. But any particular way that people can be separated from each other, it seems like that kind of separation is happening. How do millennials look at this? Do they look at this as being a problem that they're inheriting, or do they look at it as a challenge or something that they're going to do something to overcome? Is that emerged yet? What a generalized approach will be?
Oh boy, yeah, we could talk for half hour just about that, John. Definitely they have strong opinions, and given my context of growing up in the church and still being in the church, I probably don't see eye to eye with lots of millennials. On some levels, I think they're going to be very involved in it. I don't know to what extent discourse is profitable. I think people have pretty strong opinions, so I think discourse is all we have. But I might be as scared by that as you are. I don't know. So we'll see. But definitely strong opinions on politics. I was talking to David before we started too that those opinions might not translate into things that you'd expect to see. I mean, by statistics, you can see they don't translate at the polls necessarily into people coming out to vote, but they do translate into other actions. So it's interesting to see what avenues young people take to affect change that are maybe different than other generations would. And so that's where you can, when you're trying to reach people with the gospel, you have to evaluate what avenues they're working through to be heard or to communicate, and to say, okay, we're gonna see how they're talking, and if it's not ABC of voting and going into a congregation and whatever, it's okay, well, how do we take the church to those avenues and meet them in discourse there?
Oftentimes it's you're cataloged as being entitlement people.
Sure.
That your generation of people are entitled to the things that for us didn't exist, especially for me. Does that entitlement mentality mean anything among you, or is it just kind of cheap words?
I think that's a commonly held view. We talked a little about this too before the program, and I really try and be a bootstraps guy and pull myself up by my bootstraps. So while I feel that in my generation, it doesn't really resonate with me personally. But I think for a variety of different reasons, that's true. Some ways, I think anytime there's a big disagreement, right, there's almost never someone unilaterally wrong, right? So I think of the previous generation, there's probably some lack of seeing the problems that this generation actually experiences. And then of this generation, there's some lack of being able to perceive what their parents went through, because I witness all manners of people doing financially stupid stuff because they're trying to live how their parents are after 45 years of working. At the same time, people are told the narrative of get a degree, it's what you need to do, and then they come out and there's not a job. And while I don't agree that you need to necessarily be entitled to one now, I understand people's kind of feeling like they were lied to and that the rug was pulled out from under them in their lives.